Good afternoon, Muskegon. It's time for Touring the Two, your show for news, information, and more. It's Gregory T. Roberts, your host for this 17th of February 2023. 21 degrees outside, and be careful out there because that snow hit us hard yesterday. Coming in hot is the new city manager of Muskegon Heights, Pastor Melvin Burns II. How you doing, sir?
Hey, I'm good. I'm gonna have to stress the interim on that, but it's good to be
Oh,
here,
okay.
brother.
So I'll put interim on that.
Thank you.
But hey, man, way to step up for your community.
I'm trying, brother. I want to do my part.
All right. Listen, speaking of doing that part, I know you're driving home. Oh, matter of fact, let me do some housekeeping. If this show repeats itself, if you're driving and you would like to see the show, just go back to WVS 103.7 The Beat, Facebook site, or M106, and it just repeats itself. Or don't forget the emoji app. It's also on YouTube as well. So right now, if you're watching the show on Facebook, share it, please. The second thing is that you're probably thinking, as home, I'm going home. It's Friday. I just want to chill. I don't want to be serious. And here's the problem with that. While you have that little attitude, somebody is going to jail tonight.
Mm.
Some child is going to witness something that they don't need to witness. We're going into a new series on domestic violence. If you don't think it's a problem, go to the Muskegon County Jail site and see how many people are in prison, in jail for domestic violence right now. If you don't think it's a problem, it doesn't. It's no color. It's no money. It's in every neighborhood, and I know we just talked about a hard subject, and we're going to keep on doing it because putting a scarlet letter on somebody and forgetting and putting your head in the sand is not going to do it. So we're going to start our series on domestic violence. This affects men, women, and children.
Yeah.
Being a survivor of domestic violence, I grew up with it in my household, and let's do something about it. Um, with that said, let's introduce our guest, um, Katie Norton, and I want to thank Prosecutor DJ Hilton for. I called him and he made contact really fast, and also Officer Kyle Neher. Yeah, hopefully I got that right. How you guys
Yep.
doing? So, did I get it right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, okay. Let's start with you, Katie, and then we'll go to Officer Kyle about your credentials, a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I went to Michigan State for undergrad and for law school. Once I got out of law school, I worked for Parmenro Tool as a city attorney. I've also done some criminal defense work for Judge Close at District Court where they had the public defender's office. I've done
Mm-hmm.
family law and private practice, and I've done officially now 10 years in the Muskegon County Prosecutor's Office where I worked in District Court. I then ran our family and juvenile divisions, and then we had an opportunity in 2019 to apply for the Stop Violence Against Women grant, and we received that grant and developed the task force, and I've been assigned to as that prosecutor since then.
Okay, how about you, Officer Neer?
So I am a detective with Norton First Police Department. I've been here 17 years now. I started as a road patrol officer for about 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then I did narcotics. I worked for We Met for 3 years. If people aren't familiar with that, that's the West Michigan Enforcement Team. It's a state police run undercover narcotics team that works primarily in the Muskegon County area here, but also in Ottawa and South. I came out of that and worked as a general case detective for about 4 years with the city of Norton Shores. Um, After that, I did some training of new officers. Now I've been one of the detectives since the inception of this Muskegon County Justice for Women Task Force when we got that grant. So I'm assigned actually downtown to the county building, and I work on a lot of the other jurisdictions in the county.
I see. Yeah, you do wear a lot of hats.
There were a lot of hats, yes.
Pastor Burns.
Okay, why don't y'all tell us about this Stop Violence Against Women unit and what it entails for you two.
So Kyle and I are one of the original members. When we first were able to apply for the grant, we wanted it to be to incorporate a couple of different police departments that could go county-wide. And so we each applied for our own grant funded positions to then go countywide and investigate any sort of intimate partner violence. So that involves domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking cases. And we actually ended up receiving that grant, so it funded one prosecutor and two detectives. With that was so successful, the next year they doubled our grant. We have two prosecutors under this grant and 4 detectives. So the departments that we work with on the grant are the City of Muskegon Police Department and the City of Norton Shores Police Department, but they are all have the ability to investigate countywide any domestic violence or intimate partner violence cases.
So here's a question for both of you. When I introduced the show, am I kidding or am I exaggerating when I said domestic violence is a problem in Muskegon County?
Absolutely, it's a problem. I mean, it's one of the primary calls for service that we go to as police officers. Domestic violence is kind of a big umbrella, so a lot of them are written as civil disputes. I mean, we're called when there are assaults. We're called when there are not assaults. We're called when there's disagreements. So that's one of the biggest calls that we respond to as officers. Obviously, we're regulated by laws when we have to make an arrest for domestic violence cases when there's assault, or that there's somewhat probable cause that we can form. There's an assault case, and we're required to make arrests on that. So, but yeah, it's a big problem in Muskegon. It's a big problem for consistently. I think one of the top counties in Michigan that per capita that has issues with domestic violence and domestic arrests. So.
And when the police respond, they don't always choose to, but if they choose to send us a warrant request, then we review that matter for charges. So those are the statistics we have. Last year in 2022, there were over 1,300 sent up that had some sort of domestic violence component in it that they wanted reviewed for charges out of about 5,000 that we received total in the prosecutor's office last year.
Can you say, wait, whoa. Can you say those numbers again, please?
Yeah, so we have, when the police officers send it up and they want us to review what we call a warrant request.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we have it sorted, we can sort it out. So if they list domestic violence as one of the possible issues or reasons that they send it up for our review for criminal charges, we can kind of look back through our stats. And we had about 5,000 and something last year in 2022 for all of the warrant requests that we received. And we had about 1,300 alone that had some part of it involving a domestic violence.
Wow, Pastor Burns.
Officer Neher, can you walk us through and how you initially get involved in these cases? And again, I don't know, Katie, if you can tell us where you're involved, or are you both involved from the very beginning? But kind of walk us through the process.
Sure. So it depends on the severity of the case when I get involved. It also depends on if an arrest was made by the initial responding officer. I kind of touched on it before. By law, we're required to make an arrest when there's an assault on a domestic violence case. Okay. A lot of times, if the offender is still on scene, the officer should be making a custodial arrest and lodging the person that committed the crime in Muskegon County Jail. That's by law. Domestic violence is one of those cases where we don't have discretion. So, and that's a good thing. So so they should be making that arrest. When there's not an arrest at the time, a lot of times what will happen is victim will call 911 because something's active, and then the offender will left the scene. Right? You see that. You see that very common, very common in these type of cases. So then the officer would take an initial report from the victim, and then that would usually get sent up for warrant requests, like Kate was saying, and then reviewed for charges. So in those cases, a lot of times when Kate reviews those, and she'll then forward those cases to me if an arrest wasn't made. A lot of times we have the ability with our resources to put a little more time and effort into trying to track down offenders in these cases to get them arrested sooner than later, so that we can start that process of getting conditions in place where they can't have contact with the victim, where they can't have contact with residents again, or these other bond conditions that judges put to protect these victims, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of times that's when I get involved in these cases, when they're either somebody's arrested, when they're submitted for review, and somebody hasn't been arrested yet, and I can put some more time trying to find the offender and getting them lodged at the county jail. And Katie can touch on it too, but what starts as a domestic violence case can lead to a ton of other charges. I mean, when there's weapons involved, when there's stalking involved, when there's children involved, there's a lot of serious charges that stem from these cases, other than just a simple assault that's with a domestic relationship. So if it's a case that has a lot of things that require more investigation and require follow-up photographs, require specialized medical exams, if there's strangulation involved or serious injuries, or if there's weapons involved and we need to execute search warrants to try to track down weapons. So it's been really nice, because some cases before our task force 3 years ago would just kind of fizzle out at that initial officer response, okay, right? And they weren't able, and due to resources in different jurisdictions that are different, some jurisdictions weren't able to follow through those cases and do the type of investigation that we can now offer with our resources. So yeah, that's where it's been good for our task force to be involved in some of these.
Okay. Katie, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, as far as when we get involved, like Kyle was saying, a lot of times this is for the ones that we think of that occur more regularly. A lot of times that's the road officer, and then we're evaluating it later. For the more serious ones, we'll get called out. The prosecutor's office can be involved prior to that warrant request process, because we're involved in the search warrants and things like that. So a lot of times we'll get called after hours or on weekends if it's a more serious one that needs a little bit more investigation.
Now, to the officer Neher, the rule has changed. It used to be in the old days that somebody, maybe they thought they had a miscommunication, they got into a brawl, and then on Friday that happened, but Monday they wanted to drop the charges. That has changed now.
Correct. Yeah. When all of those policies changed, and I don't know exactly what year it was, I think it was in like late 90s, all of that really started to change, where this idea, when there's a domestic relationship, this idea of dropping charges doesn't exist, right? And it shouldn't come into play when officers are making a decision to arrest or not, or if they're deciding at the prosecutor level to authorize charges. This idea of does the victim wish to continue with charges or pursue charges doesn't come into play when domestic relationships are involved, because of the inherent danger and nature of these cases.
I think too, like there's been an evolving understanding of the power and control in these relationships, and that there could be kind of underlying reasons why people are, quote unquote, not wanting to go forward with charges. Mm-hmm. And, we've had a lot of situations where we're like, it's not you pressing charges, it's us. And they've been so thankful that we kind of took the heat off of them, but still was able to get them safe and get them out of that situation.
Pastor Burns.
Okay, and I apologize. I'm not doing the best. I'm on a different device today. But what parts of the system you're working in seem to work well for you all? And what are some of the big obstacles you seem to still have a difficult time with?
So I think that the fact that we can, like Kyle was saying, put some extra effort into this, and it's not just making sure that we're putting someone in jail, but making sure that we're getting it right. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Making sure that we have time to listen to everyone, to see if there's other witnesses, so that we aren't getting it wrong, so that we are keeping people safe that truly are victims and things like that. So I think that has been really great. I always describe to people that Muskegon's kind of like this little big town or this big little town where, you know, we all kind of know each other. Like, it's busy, there's a lot of people, we have a lot of stuff going on to investigate, but we also kind of know each other as far as in the communities. And so we're able to kind of all work together with our community partners as law enforcement, with Every Woman's Place, Hope Project, all of those. So we're able to kind of really work together to create the best situation to try to assist to decrease domestic violence, whatever that means, helping offenders get treatment, helping keep victims safe, that we all are able to work together. I think the biggest difficulty, hands down, that we have is that I think people do call and want the police to resolve the issue in the moment, and they don't want to have it continue to affect their life beyond that moment once the person's moved or once that fight is over. And that really sends a bad message to offenders everywhere, because they think that if people just don't show up for court, then they can get away with it. And I've got warrant requests where I'll see their criminal history and it'll be like dismiss, 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 dismiss. Well, then that person's not only not being held accountable, but they're also not receiving the treatment that they need so that this doesn't happen again.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Talk about because Officer Neher, I mean, you're like the first one to see these households. You come in the household and you got kids, and they see this. Talk about that whole experience, and then Katie, talk a little bit more about how the families are affected about this whole thing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, just like with anything else, when we respond to residences, I guess the hard part for a road officer responding to a lot of these domestic calls is that, unfortunately, we know our service population, where we're at, and unfortunately we continue to be called to the exact same houses and the exact same problems. When you work at a district or a same area for a certain amount of time, you get to know the people. You get to know the people who have toxic relationships, who are involved in domestic violence, and unfortunately, you've probably arrested one of the parties before that's involved. But you do continue to go there, and as you go there, and as I train new officers, you start to get to know the kids involved that are in, and I can still remember 17 years ago, I've seen these same kids when they were toddlers, then they become, young adults, juveniles, then they become older adults. And unfortunately, when part of the big problem with domestic violence is I truly believe that if you see that as a child and you think that's okay for people to act like that, and that's your experience with relationships, I think, unfortunately, I see a lot of those kids that were young men that witnessed the people in their lives being part of that, or witnessing a father figure that was involved in a domestic violence relationship with his mom. When that becomes normal, unfortunately, we see a lot of that continue into adulthood with their relationships. So, yeah, I find that is one of the things for road officers, especially if you've been doing this job for a long time, is it weighs on you seeing the same people with the same problems that you continue to try to resolve and seem to not get resolved until something really bad happens. So that's why we do these. That's why, to me, it is very important that arrests are made, because if they aren't, it's very empowering for someone who's the offender in a domestic violence relationship, if they're not held accountable with an arrest or something to stop that, it almost seems like it's super empowering when an arrest isn't made, that it continues and then escalates from there. So.
Yeah, and as far as the kids, I think that we're understanding it more now, but I think that people think that just because the kids are not physically harmed in these situations, that they're not emotionally harmed. And I think that it really does provide a lot of trauma to kids when they are seeing that in their home. And because of that, CPS will get involved with supports for a family just based on domestic violence, because they know how easily that can traumatize kids and affect their behaviors and affect their mental well-being. And it's kind of something that you can't see on the outside because it's not, bruises and cuts and all of that stuff, but it really affects them.
Hey, I need a contact for CPS. Don't let me forget that. Pastor Burns.
I've got a million. I'll give them to you.
But hey, your last comment was limited. My other thought. We've had people on the past 2 weeks of dealing in the area, of treating some of these victims and even abusers. Where are you all? We know we can't lock everybody up. So where are you all involved in that process in terms of for the abuser and the victims, treatment being a part of their sentencing or how you deal with these cases?
Yeah, treatment's a huge part. They have developed a lot of great programs through the Batterers Group, through addressing any mental health needs. A lot of this, we have people come in and say they're a great person, except when they use drugs or they have alcohol. So then we know that we have to kind of treat a substance abuse issue. But a substance abuse issue is usually something where someone's trying to self-medicate for a mental health issue or some unresolved trauma. So you really have to kind of be able to get down to the bottom of that. And I will say domestic violence is one of those crimes that, although we have all those safeguards that Kyle mentioned to keep people safe, because that's our primary goal, is to try to get people safe in the situation first, but they also have a lot of grace when it comes to what do we do in the sentencing portion. There's a part of the domestic violence statute built right into it is a one-time kind of deferred, I call it kind of like a mulligan, where it goes off of your public record. But even though it's off your public record, you can use it to enhance if they get another one. So it's not like they're starting from scratch. So it doesn't hurt them. But if you start creating a pattern for yourself, then you are going to start, upping the ante, and eventually you get to it becoming a felony, and then things get a little bit more significant. So I think they do have a lot of treatment options, and it's kind of one of those, they'll help those that help themselves. So if they get involved and plugged in, hopefully we never see them again. If they are repeat offenders, then they're going to quickly add up to a felony real quick.
We see that this is just not a woman issue. This is actually men get jumped on too as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Our grant does, even though it's the Violence Against Women unit for the Department of Health and Human Services that kind of facilitates this grant, they do include males as victims. They include same-sex couples, transgender. It's very inclusive. And yeah, I was just actually checking out the national statistics before we went on the air, and it's 1 in 4 women are victims, 1 in 7 men are victims of some sort of severe physical abuse. And when you just look at just physical assault, maybe not very severe, it's 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men.
So 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, and then when we were talking about molestation last week, is 1 in 6 and 1 in 8. People, do you hear these numbers? This is insane. This is happening in Muskegon as we talk. Pastor Burns.
You kind of touched on it. It's usually not just that one thing, but you mentioned the substance abuse. How prevalent is that in these cases?
I would say that substance abuse overall has a huge impact on the crime rate in Muskegon County. In theft, in fraud, in retail frauds, even all the way up to weapons offenses. I think that there is a huge number where there's some drug or alcohol component.
Okay.
I'm just bewildered over here. Officer Neher, like I said, being a survivor of domestic violence, um, how do you train your officers to deal with the everyday grind of seeing these cases?
So we're pretty fortunate at my department when I did training at Norton Shores, and I think overall in Muskegon County, we are pretty fortunate with the amount of training that we have available to us here and to go through. We have the West Michigan Training Consortium that a lot of departments in West Michigan are a part of, and I think all of the Muskegon County agencies are a part of. So we're pretty fortunate when it comes to training. All of the new officers, and I think you'll find this whole county go through a pretty extensive field training program after they come out of the academy and get through all that. And one part about that is getting used to responding to domestic calls. So yeah, that's a big part of our field training program. Some guys coming out of the academy or girls coming out of the academy that some of them have very little life experience, and they're shocked to see kind of people that didn't grow up like them, or if you have a 20-something-year-old who didn't grow up in that type of atmosphere, and then you expose them to this world of substance abuse and violence, and I can tell you, watching some of the people that I've trained over the years, when they walk into that first experience that they're not used to, it is kind of a shell shock for them, and walking them through that and getting them used to how some people that didn't necessarily grow up like they did, and how they can utilize their training and utilize their experience now, walking through it with a more senior officer and understanding how that works. We offer a lot of trainings here. We just hosted one in Muskegon for responding officers responding to domestic violence. That was a full day course. There's responding to strangulation, personal protection orders, and stalking. The city of Michigan has really done a good job of hosting different trainers, and usually they're teamed up with the prosecuting attorney and with a seasoned detective who's involved in domestic violence that has put on these trainings, and the city of Muskegon just hosted one here for all the officers to attend to. So.
And as far as like the grind, I mean, they do a lot of training too on mental health for the officers, where they have to have check-ins and like how to keep themselves kind of safe from the secondary trauma that they experience from having to respond to all these calls.
What about the prosecutor's office? I mean, you guys deal with a lot of stuff as well.
Yes, it's definitely one of those things where you have to find a way to compartmentalize and go home to your families and not have those cases linger. But I think Kyle can probably attest that we definitely have those cases that are hard to forget when we leave and go home, and that keep us up at night. But we are fortunate enough too that they talk a lot about that in our trainings as well through the Prosecutors Association of Michigan of how to make sure that we're keeping ourselves healthy and not getting too bogged down with a lot of, like I said, that empathetic secondary trauma that you can receive from just hearing, from victims over and over again what they're going through.
And domestic violence.
Go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, and domestic violence cases are one of the most dangerous calls that we go to for sure, just because people are making decisions on super passionate things and they're under the influence, and at that point they aren't making rational decisions, and that's one of the things that we're walking into as a responding officer when we're knocking on a door and really have no idea other than a little bit of information from 911 what we're walking into, and we're going into homes where people have access to weapons in their homes and are and could be under the influence. it's just one of those cases where there's so many unknowns, and we go to so many of those calls for service that it's one of the more stressful things and one of the higher risk calls that we respond to as officers, and that's why any domestic related call is always a 2 officer response because of the inherent nature of the call.
Pastor Burns.
Help us and help our listeners out. No, nobody wants to be the nosy neighbor or the person that interferes, but um, you hear your neighbors Friday and Saturday night. Hey, I'm out of public and I hear a couple in the store. Kind of, the voices are starting to raise, and sometimes you see and hear things, and you get that, the hair on your neck standing up. And I've been cases where I've seen, but help us out as average citizens. What do we do in those instances when we hear the neighbors, we know something's going on? We don't want to call 911 because we want people to know we're the ones that called, but we see enough stuff that we're concerned.
Yeah, so I mean, I would never discourage anyone from calling 911 at all, because there's so many different ways that we can, as police officers, can respond to that call. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it depends on the authority level we have, and that's kind of what I teach new officers too that are responding to this. If it's an anonymous call, which is totally fine, if that makes you feel more comfortable as a caller, if you're like, hey, I don't really want to get involved in this. It's not my business, but this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
You can remain anonymous. There's nothing wrong with that. You can tell dispatch, I don't want to be named, or I don't want to be called. So that's one way that you can do it, and we will still respond and make sure there's not more to the situation. Another thing that dispatch will commonly ask is they'll take all the information. They'll say, hey, do you mind just giving your telephone number, and the officer can call you after the call is done if they have more questions. So I really like that, because although we'll still respond to the incident at hand, but a lot of times we'll have more questions for that person. And if you call, you don't have to wait around at that point. You don't have to sit there while the officers respond to deal with everything and watch it. You can call and just leave your telephone number with dispatch. I encourage that a lot more than the anonymous call, because if someone just calls anonymous, that's fine, but we really have limited authority when we can't put a name or a number to what they saw, we just have limited authority, and that's how the whole system's set up, so that people can't just make anonymous calls and claim things and then have us go, arrest people or go based on an anonymous caller, because the courts look at that authority a little different when somebody witnessed something firsthand, when we have the name of the person that called, when we have their telephone number, even if they aren't standing there to talk to before we go deal with that call. If we have all that information, then they look at that differently. Like, we have the authority then to go do that because we can follow up with that person. So I would at least encourage you to leave your name and telephone number, and at least so that officer can call you if they have questions, especially if you witness some sort of assault. That's a big thing for us, and for our ability to then handle things differently with the people involved. And I can tell you, I've had a lot of cases that started out even with an anonymous call, or even with somebody just calling about people arguing in an apartment, that have spiraled into a lot, like very serious domestic violence cases, things where children are involved and all that. So, yeah, I would never caution somebody against calling 911. Even, I mean, in apartment complexes, we get the same, we get that a lot, where people hear their neighbors above them, or hear them arguing, or especially if they hear something that they think was the assault, that really gives us a lot more authority to go investigate that and be able to just at least call them.
You know what? You need to do something, because some of these domestic cases have evolved where the spouse did not survive. Katie, I'm thinking about this. I've talked to people, and this is to you, Kyle, as well, where these people, because they grew up in domestic violence, it's the only thing they know. Their grandparents, their father, now them, it's the only thing they know. So it's acceptable where they think where I need to put my hands on her to get her to respect me or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when you grow up and you either see that as that this is what love looks like, or this is what's normal in a relationship, you then tend to not call the police because you think this is normal and that this is just what relationships look like, or this is private and this is what happens in our home, and so we don't get police involved. And I think that that's the hesitation with other people calling as well is should I be sticking my nose in somebody else's business a little bit? But this would be my call to action for the public as an opportunity, because it's really difficult as a prosecutor when you've got one person saying one thing and one person saying the other. You, as that caller, are such an important part to say, nope, I heard it, and I have no dog in this fight. And that a lot of times juries are tough these days. They really expect a lot out of investigations. These crime shows have caused them to believe that there's got to be some sort of smoking gun. When really most of, especially my cases and Kyle's cases, it really comes down to one person saying that this happened versus the other. They expect all these injuries, this big bloody scene, and that's just not reality. And so when you're that caller that heard something, at some point you can make a huge impact on decreasing domestic violence if you just are willing to get involved.
Yeah.
Kyle, anything you like to add to that?
No, that was a really good point. I agree. Yeah, jurors are hard these days. So that's I guess going back to encouraging people to just leave their phone number, because if we don't have that phone number or can't talk to that person, no matter what they saw at the time, if they just want to remain anonymous and not involved, then we really can't use that. So yeah, I agree that neutral third party is huge for these cases, because when we respond to these calls, you are going to be getting two different stories. I mean, two conflicting stories. And so anything that we can use, whether it be physical evidence at the scene, whether it be a neutral third party, for sure helps us. And even when it comes to the decision that night to make an arrest for that police officer, because if you have two totally conflicting stories and you truly can't find anything to decide who the aggressor was with this intimate partner violence, it's very hard to make an arrest and be able to articulate that why you arrested one person over the other person when you don't have that either evidence or neutral third party to decide to make an arrest that night. And then we're in this difficult position of, hey, can somebody leave for the night? No, I'm not leaving. Okay, can somebody go up to their room for the night, please? No, I'm not going up to my room. Okay, we'll probably be called back here in 2 hours.
Yeah.
So yes, that last little bit of evidence, even if it's another person calling or any little piece of physical evidence that we can have, for sure helps us all along the way, even from the initial response to the arrest of the person responsible to stop whatever's going on that night, to being able to hold them accountable all the way through the criminal justice process to trial and that. So.
But anonymous call is still better than no.
Okay. We have a question from comment from Bonita Threadgill. We have to look out for one another. What if it was one of our loved ones? You would want someone to speak out. The least little detail could make a huge difference. Thank you, Bonita. Let me ask a question. You guys, obviously, you guys are involved after something happened, but if you could scream it loud enough for everybody to hear you and listen, what are the things you'd want everybody to take away before you all get involved? To say, hey, if don't do anything else, do this.
Oh gosh, there's like so much that you could say. I mean, obviously, I would want people to, look for key factors in their relationships. Number one, to have self-value enough to get out of those situations. when you start seeing the warning signs for yourself, and to understand that going to people for help, going to community resources for help, so you're not reliable on someone for, or relying on someone for financial dependency, for daycare, for housing. I mean, being able to go and seek that help so that you don't feel like you have to stay with this person, and looking at those red flags, I think, are huge. And I think a lot of people think like, oh, it's not going to happen to me, or it won't happen again, or I'm really embarrassed that this happened to me because I never thought it would. I think people have to be willing to kind of to stand up and say, I'm getting out of this situation. I also think that, you know, just like we just talked about, I think the biggest thing is that the follow through when it does happen is to beyond the phone call, is to understand that this is a process, but the process is going to end hopefully in reducing it for, maybe if they're not staying in that relationship, so either reducing it for them or for the next person down the road that person gets with, that it reduces it. So to hold someone accountable so that they can get the treatment. A lot of these people don't get the treatment until their feet are kind of held to the fire a little bit, and then hopefully it clicks. I mean, that's always the goal. I say that to everyone when I talk with victims that say, I don't want them to get in trouble and I don't want to ruin their lives. I say, I don't want to either. Our goals are the same, which is that I don't want to see you folks back here or have to make another phone call. So we're on the same team. But sometimes we have to get people into the system, meet them where they're at in order to get that intervention.
Okay.
As a teenager, I was told in one particular incident where we had at a house where the officer called me to the side and says, "Hey man, look at your side." He says, "Why don't you guys just beat the crap out of them and I got your back." That was old school thinking, but that is probably not a wise thing to do, Kyle.
No,
Yeah.
definitely.
No, yeah.
We definitely don't want anyone to intervene, even when you're talking about those callers. Like, you don't want to intervene. You don't want to go to the door. I mean, you don't know what's going on in there. So I definitely wouldn't recommend anyone intervening or anyone trying to, you know, to resort to like a vigilante type justice situation. You have to let the system work, but you have to actively lean into it and be involved for it to be able to work the way it's meant to.
What if it's
Yeah,
happening in
and
your
and
house?
I want to double down.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to double down on what Katie was saying about just seeing the process through. And I can tell you from my perspective, from responding to hundreds of these calls on the road to now dealing with them on the investigative side of things, and I see a little more of the court process, obviously, than your road officer who responds to these sees. And I mean, our criminal justice system isn't perfect, and sometimes it takes way too long, and it took even longer over COVID. We saw that where things were just slowly going through the system. And one of the problems with domestic violence cases is that they don't get seen all the way through, and that's for any number of reasons. They're together, they end up acting together before you had a chance to get going through, and then we can't track people down for subpoenas, or they avoid us to get served for any court. And it is, I don't necessarily know how to fix that, because it is kind of a process that goes through. So things that were really, that was one of the main goals when we started this task force was, how can we do whatever we can to see this whole process through, because so many victims drop off before we get to the point of accountability and sentencing. It's just a ton of them drop off. And so we've tried to do everything we can. I try to stay in contact with all of our victims, even if it means sending a text to them and just letting them know that I'm there, or reaching out, or sending a picture of my card, or just things like that, where I try to stay in touch with them so they don't think that this case just disappeared, even if they're having second thoughts or something's happened. They're like, you know what, this isn't worth it. I found that that's just so important, just staying in touch with them and being like, hey, we're still here, or hey, if you can't make it to court, I'll come pick you up and drive you over there. I don't care. I'll take half an hour out of my day and drive you over there. Now, those are things that you can't, that road officers can't do, or sometimes we couldn't do because of resources. But we really made that a priority to try to just let them know, hey, don't just not show up. Don't just avoid your subpoena. Come over and talk to Katie if you have an issue with it. Come over and give your input. And if we can explain to these victims of these crimes that, especially first-time offenders, the system's set up to help them and possibly even work on the relationship where they come out in the end where this doesn't happen again, and possibly even, stay together in the end if everything works the way it should, especially for first-time offenders. So I try to really instill that in people, is that just your input is part of this process. Don't disappear. That doesn't help anybody, because then it just shows up as another dismissed case on a criminal history somewhere, and no one really helped, and then we're back here again 3 months from now with the same, starting over at the same thing. So just sticking with it. It's not a perfect system. It's not a perfect process, and we're trying to, with our task force here, with 4 detectives and 2 prosecutors, we really focused on trying to help that system of these victims just not being part of it or dropping off to see it through. So,
okay, question coming to you, Pastor Burns.
This is also from Benita Threadgill. Are victims able to make an incident report as opposed to a police report to have the matter documented?
So it's essentially, this is probably more for Kyle, but it's essentially the same thing. So if someone tried to call the prosecutor's office, which they do, a lot of them will say, I just want to report something, or either as a witness or a victim, we have to refer them to the police department, because we don't make reports and we don't initiate investigations or anything like that. So whether you call it an incident report or something like that, you're really making a police report. But I think how they choose to document it, you could probably comment on that, about if you comment or if you put in there that whether or not what their feelings are about wanting it to be sent to me,
Yeah, so we can always take an incident report. In these type of cases, I always try to make contact in person for a lot of reasons. We don't, these type of calls, we don't like to take over the phone. Some reports like larcenies and things like that, we take over the phone, but I think our officers are really encouraged to make a face-to-face contact with the victim or somebody who's filing a police report like this. If not just to make sure there's not more going on. That could be our first initial contact with someone, and we see injuries or we see other things that are very clear that there's a lot deeper case of domestic violence going on here. So that face-to-face contact with these people who are making these calls or that are involved in domestic violence is really important for us from an investigative standpoint, and for us to stop something that they might just think that this is just, hey, I just want this documented. But the other thing is, if there's legitimate claims of physical assault in a relationship, when it comes to that domestic, I wouldn't discourage anyone from reporting it, but if it involves a domestic relationship and we observe injuries, or we see, or there's a claim of severe physical assault, we as police officers are required to submit that to the prosecutor's office for review on charges.
And even if it goes nowhere, it's super helpful to have that in the system, because I can go back, and there's part of the domestic violence statute that allows for me to take all of their prior domestic violence, whether they're convictions or not, and I can attach those police reports, send it to the defense attorney, and say, I'm bringing all this up in trial, because I get to show the jury. It's one of the only times that I can argue propensity for violence is in a domestic violence situation, and it's a lot of times based off of, it doesn't have to be reported, but it's super helpful when it is, because I know that pattern of behavior exists, whereas I don't necessarily know unless the victim comes in and tells me that there's been a history. So I otherwise can look it up in our system and say, wow, this person, they might not have many convictions on their record, but they have like 20 different police reports in here that they've been beating up their different girlfriends over the years.
What do you say that you talked about it earlier, Katie, that what do you say to that person that stays around and just takes the abuse because of financial reasons?
Yeah, I mean, that's always tough. I think it's short-sighted to see that, because I think what looks like a huge hurdle in the moment of being able to get over that financial dependency is something that's so short-lived and can be helped. I think that there's so many resources that people don't utilize. And I think sometimes people see it, like you were talking about in the beginning, with like a stigma on these people that reported. I think there's a stigma sometimes for people that go to Every Woman's Place and ask for help. But the funds they have, I didn't even know that all the funding that they have. They can get bus tickets for you to go live with your family out of state. They can give you money to transition housing. They can give you money for new cell phones so that the offenders can't find you. We've got a program in our task force where we can put cameras on your home so that if you feel like the offender is going to come back, we can help with that. So does DHS, and so does Every Woman's Place. A lot of times people, and understandably so, do not want CPS involved, but a lot of times that is just an opening for a lot of funding for them to be able to get on their feet and away from this offender just enough until they can stand on their own. So this community is ready, willing, and able to assist with that. You just have to let them.
Mhm.
Here's the question: what do you guys say to that teenager or that child that's in the household? How to handle the situation?
We always say tell, and keep on telling until someone believes you, right, with any abuse situation. So the best situation that they can tell in, obviously we would encourage any situation to run out of the house, run to a neighbor's house, call the police, get a phone, call the police if there's an active situation, for sure. If it's just this ongoing situation where they want to talk about it, school is a great resource to go to because they're out of the home, so they can be interviewed out of the home, so nobody really knows that they're making the report. Their mom doesn't know, or their dad doesn't know that they're making the report, and they can kind of feel safe in that moment because nobody's kind of, around the corner or peeking at them saying, like, what are you saying to those police officers? They just really kind of tell their story. But I think, they just need to understand that it's okay to tell, and that they're not the ones doing something wrong. The offenders in this situation are the ones doing something wrong, that they aren't blowing up the family or messing up this family or breaking up the family by telling. The offender's already done that.
Huge. Pastor Burns.
Two things. One, I wanted to talk about protection orders. You mentioned those earlier. There's a lot of discussion, I know the good and bad of them, but talk to them a little bit about protection orders, what they can do and what they can't do for people.
Yeah, so there's there's three different kinds of protection orders that we can do. So there's personal protection orders like the PPO, which is actual a civil filing that a person does on their own, which Every Woman's Place can help, but it doesn't have to be tied to a criminal case. They need one incident of threatening, assaultive, harassing type behavior, whereas if they have a domestic relationship. If you don't have a domestic relationship, you need at least 2 incidents in order to apply for that PPO. And both of those are civil filings, and the prosecutor's office can be involved down the road when there's violations, but generally speaking, we're not involved in the application of it or the serving of it or anything like that. Now, that being said, I'll just put in a little plug that if the offender is in jail, the jail, I believe, still will, if you drop them off at the front desk, they will serve the person in the jail for you. So that's a good piece. So then you also have no contact orders. So when a criminal case gets issued and the bond gets set, either an interim bond or eventually when the individual is arraigned, the judge or magistrate will put normally a no contact order in place. So that'll be against the victim or the resident. Sometimes it's with minor children. And if they violate that, then I can bring something before the judge saying that they should increase the bond or revoke the bond and remand them to the jail because they're not complying with the no contact order. In a PPO hearing, the judge can also sentence to jail. It takes a little longer and it's considered a contempt process. I do always say that even though you have the criminal case with the no contact order, it's good to also get a PPO because the PPO on it will have an expiration date, and no matter what happens to the criminal case, if it gets dismissed or, somehow he gets out early or something like that, you will always know the date of your PPO expiring and can renew it. You might not always get notice if a case gets dismissed or something like that. So it's good to kind of have both of them in place. But one thing it does not do is both of these are just pieces of paper. And if people are willing to go and violate or commit murder or something like that, they're not going to care that there's a no contact order in place whatsoever. So in both situations, people still have to use their common sense and take safety precautions and all of those things too.
Okay.
Okay, so now it's time to get that shameless plug in. Again, let's talk about the task force, phone numbers, email. I mean, how can people get in touch or get involved in the system?
So our task force is set up where, I mean, and really the whole criminal justice aspect of things is set up where you call 911. 911 is the call you make, and especially with domestic violence. There's got to be somebody that responds out there to help you with the 911 call. And our process gets started when that officer comes out and takes that police report, and those reports get reviewed by Katie when they get submitted for review. I review countywide reports also. All the different agencies in Muskegon County all have our information for the task force, and we work under a mutual aid agreement. So this task force was kind of formed with the authority of all the police chiefs and sheriff in Muskegon County. They get together, and when this was presented and we got these grants, all of them signed an agreement. All of the police chiefs and sheriff signed an agreement with this task force that we would have the authority to help each other out under a mutual aid agreement for Muskegon County here for our Justice for Women task force. So it really starts with your individual agency in your jurisdiction that's in that jurisdiction. You have to file an initial report with them, and they will handle that 911 call and handle it at step one, and then it gets referred to us from there, either by that jurisdiction, can be by the responding officer, or it can come through the prosecutor's office via a warrant request at that time, and then it gets reviewed, and if it fits for further investigation, or even help with people that need right support or serving subpoenas or cameras or things like that, where we get involved and follow up with text messages with victims, or phone calls, or victim services through the prosecutor's office. There's just a lot of things once that first initial 911 call and police report's made that kind of put us into action.
Yeah, and I would say if people have questions about or concerns about the task force, they can obviously call the prosecutor's main number, which is 231-724-6435, and they can talk to an advocate. They can talk to me if they have questions about it. It's pretty much a law enforcement-based task force. If there's people out there that want to get involved to help do volunteer things that end domestic violence, they certainly every women's place takes a lot of volunteers. The Hope Project does a lot of events that need volunteers, and to just keep spreading the awareness through all of that.
And all of the domestic violence response that we do, we give out a pamphlet like this. It's a crime victim rights pamphlet for those of you that can't see it, and it has all those contact numbers and information for the prosecutor's office and different resources and all that. And officers should be, every time they respond to a call of domestic violence, should be giving this to victims and callers, so they have that right at their fingertips with the responding agency, the telephone number, the officer who responded. That should be given out to all of them. And if it's not, when I follow up, we give them all that too.
Is that something that we can have here to hand out to people?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to make sure that we get that here so we can pass out to make sure that people, if you need help, get the help. There are services out there. Katie talked about Sarah and Whole Project, and Kyle talked about a couple of agencies. Every Woman's Place they talked about, who will be on in a couple weeks. This is something that we need to get involved in, and stop putting your head in the sand when you know something is going on. Last things that you guys want to say?
Just like I said, just to spread that awareness let everyone know that it's okay to come forward if you're in a domestic violence situation. You know, it's nothing to be ashamed of, and it affects everybody, like you said at the beginning, whether you're rich, poor, anything. You know, this is something that affects literally our entire community. So the best thing that we can do is talk about it, like we are today.
And thanks for having us. And there's 6 of us here that are full time just doing this now.
Wonderful.
So we're here to investigate cases and help people out in this county for sure.
All right, Pastor Burns.
Just wanted to say for you all and even the other people we've had on, we just pray that you all have good, healthy, safe ways to disengage from this. You deal with some of the worst in our society. So we're just praying for you all. And, again, just I know it's tough, but you hopefully have other ways to just step away and refresh yourselves when you get back into these things. And God bless you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
In other words, we'll see you at the club. Never mind. All right. All right. All right. All right. Listen, Muskegon, thank you so much, prosecutor, assistant prosecutor, uh, Norton, and Detective Neher. Thank you so much. This is Torn 2. We'll see you
Thank you.
next week. So I'll see you in somebody's life. Take care and God